Hello and welcome to the Business Standard Morning Show. I'm Venu Sandhu. Let's take a look at the stories for the day.
What the world needs now is people who see energy a little bit differently. Because seeing a more sustainable world isn't far in the future. We're building it now. GE, building a world that works.
On Monday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi formalized India's entry into the US-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. India has joined the bloc along with 12 other nations, including the United States, to create a geostrategic counter to China's growing clout in the region by ramping up economic cooperation. While these are early days and the final contours of India's participation are yet to emerge, there could be some areas of friction as well. This report explains why India should tread with caution.
भारत एक इंक्लूसिव और फ्लेक्सिबल इंडो पैसिफिक इकोनॉमिक फ्रेमवर्क के निर्माण के लिए आप सभी के साथ काम करेगा। मेरा मानना है कि हमारे बीच रेजिलिएंट सप्लाई चेन्स के 3 मुख्य आधार होने चाहिए: ट्रस्ट, ट्रांसपेरेंसी एंड टाइमलीनेस। मुझे विश्वास है कि यह फ्रेमवर्क इन तीनों स्तंभों को मजबूत करने में सहायक होगा।
While addressing delegates at the launch of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework or IPEF, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that the pact will pave the way for development, peace and prosperity in the region. While joining the bloc floated by US President Joe Biden, India made its intentions very clear. Peace in the region was the foremost priority for it, without which business and prosperity was not possible. IPEF is a critical part of US President Biden's plan to counter China's growing influence in the Asian economic sphere. Biden plans to do so by partnering with other countries, which are India, Australia, Brunei Darussalam, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. The IPEF has 4 pillars. The first is supply chain resilience. The second involves clean energy, decarbonization, and infrastructure. The third deals with taxation and anti-corruption. And the fourth one is fair and resilient trade. The US is also seeking to include digital economy issues like the cross-border flows and localization of data. So, what will be the shape of the pact? According to a February report by the US Congressional Research Service, US officials have stated that they do not envision the IPEF taking the form of a traditional trade agreement. The report cited a USTR official saying in February that the initiative would include different modules covering fair and resilient trade, supply chain resilience, infrastructure and decarbonization, and tax and anti-corruption. Basically, the pillars we spoke of before. Countries will have to sign up to all of the components within a module, but will not have to participate in all modules. In particular, the Fair and Resilient Trade module will be led by USTR and include digital, labor, and environment issues with some binding commitments. As reported by Business Standard, the IPEF joint statement does not call for launching negotiations for a trade pact. Instead, it only promises to begin collective discussions towards future negotiations. Without ruling out tariff negotiations under the proposed trade pact, the joint statement said that cooperation in the digital economy would be part of the efforts under IPEF. A White House fact sheet spoke of pursuing high-standard digital economy rules with regard to cross-border data flows and data localization, along with seeking strong labor and environment standards and corporate accountability provisions. And it is in these details that the devil lies. As explained previously by Business Standard, India and the US have contrasting views on digital commerce, labor, and environmental standards. In fact, India strongly resists putting such standards in any of the free trade agreements it enters into.
IPEF basically intends to bring about this kind of regulatory coherence that you just mentioned. It's very similar to what was happening in TPP. And by regulatory coherence, I really mean the whole systems of regulations that are at the heart of determining market access into their countries. So there are a whole lot of issues that are there, including digital economy, e-commerce, environmental standards, labor standards. So, for instance, the digital economy, and then the digital economy, the key issue that is important for us is this whole issue of data portability. Now, the data portability issue has not been addressed in this country effectively, because there was this bill which is now moving in the parliament, or it's somewhere. But the short point is that we haven't actually agreed yet, decided or agreed on the framework to decide whether or not we would agree to data portability. The second issue is on e-commerce. Now, in e-commerce, rules are being framed in the WTO, and India is not participating in the negotiations. We are outside the room. We are not negotiating that. And finally, on labor standards, now labor standards, there have been demands from our industry to make the standards or the whole regulation more flexible. So we want a flexibility in the labor market. So our labor standards have become weaker, if anything. So in all these issues, India, will have to address very different set of standards being a part of IPEF. The second issue, of course, is that our institutions don't have really the depth to address these issues. So both in terms of the nature of the standards and the institutions that are there to implement them and to carry them forward, India would actually face some problems. All the other countries have certain amount of preparedness because they were, as a part, they were either part of the TPP, or they knew that they would have to implement it as a member of the TPP. India is an outlier. We really have to see what kind of sensitivity other members, particularly the US, shows in terms of the concerns that India would have going forward. And then we have to see where India stands vis-a-vis IPEF.
The nature of the framework itself could be a cause for concern. According to a brief written by the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, the Biden administration has domestically portrayed the IPEF as an initiative that will enable the US to better compete with China in the region. Due to this, some of the Indo-Pacific partners had been apprehensive that instead of being a sincere and thoughtful economic program, the IPEF was primarily a political endeavor meant to counter China. The same CSIS brief also described India as possibly not being an ideal IPEF participant under current conditions, although it did say that India's exclusion from the IPEF would raise questions about how the Indo-Pacific economic framework truly is. While IPEF's success or failure is far ahead in the future, it is clear that at present, it poses a particularly tough challenge for India.
सब अच्छी दिख रही हैं यार, कौन सी खरीदूं? ये तो वही बात हुई, 4000 शेयर्स लिस्टेड है, कौन सा लूं? वो तो सबसे आसान है। तुझे 5 पैसा नहीं पता?
अब तो सबको पता है। 5 पैसा पर है 4000 स्टॉक्स की रिसर्च, टेक्निकल टूल्स और इन्वेस्टमेंट आइडियाज। डाउनलोड 5 पैसा नाउ।
अब तो सबको पता है, investing made easy and rewarding with 5 paisa. Investments in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.
From the negotiation tables in Tokyo, let us turn our focus to a storm brewing on the restaurant tables back home. On Monday, the government said that eateries were illegally taking service charges from consumers. The Eateries Association has, however, denied this and said that this is a matter of individual restaurant policy. But are the eateries that are imposing a service charge doing so illegally? Here's a deep dive into this debate.
As pandemic waned and eateries sprung back to life, the old controversy surrounding service charges at restaurants has again come to the fore. After complaints, the Department of Consumer Affairs has warned restaurants across the country against forcibly levying the charge. The government has also called a meeting with Restaurant Association to discuss the contentious issue. In a letter to the National Restaurant Association of India, which represents the interests of 5 lakh plus restaurants, Consumers Affairs Secretary Rohit Kumar Singh pointed out that restaurants have been collecting service charge from consumers by default, even though payment of any such charge is voluntary and at the discretion of consumers and not mandatory as per law. It has scheduled a meeting with NRAI on June 2nd to discuss 4 issues pertaining to service charge levied by eateries, including restaurants making service charge compulsory, adding service charge in the bill in the guise of some other fee or charge, suppressing from consumers that paying service charge is optional and voluntary, and embarrassing consumers in case they resist from paying service charge. The meeting follows the government taking notice of a number of media reports as well as grievances registered by consumers on the National Consumer Helpline. The department's letter points out that consumers are forced to pay service charge, often fixed at arbitrarily high rates by restaurants. They are also being falsely misled on the legality of such charges and harassed by restaurants on making a request to remove such charges from the bill amount. Department of Consumer Affairs has already published guidelines in April 2017 which note that the entry of a customer into a restaurant cannot by itself be constituted as consent to pay the service charge. Any restriction on entry on the consumer by way of forcing him to pay the service charge as a condition precedent to placing an order of food and beverages amounts to restrictive trade practice as defined in the Consumer Protection Act. The guidelines mention that placing of an order by a customer amounts to his agreement to pay the prices displayed on the menu card along with the applicable taxes. Charging for anything other than that without the express consent of the consumer would amount to unfair trade practice as defined under the Act.
The Department of Consumer Affairs as such is entrusted with the responsibility to take cognizance of matters which are of public importance. And if they are concerning the consumers at large, then the government will take proactive steps. The government has said, particularly in the guidelines, that the hotel or the restaurant needs to specify that this service charge is voluntary, and second, that it may leave the column pertaining to the service charge completely blank so that the person who has received this service as a matter of gratitude or tip may pay some money to the restaurant for availing this service. I would say some or very few are implementing, but most of the people are sticking to this thing that we will charge a service charge. If it remains a mandatory thing that has to be paid by the person, then the whole purpose behind the 2017 guidelines goes away. Whether it would fall under an unfair trade practice or not is something that is going to be determined by a forum or a commission. You can say the executive of the country is trying to give some directions to the judicial forums to interpret the clause in such a manner. But there is nothing that is mandatory in the guidelines as such. These are merely in the nature of guidelines, not a statute, neither a statute nor a regulation or a rule made by the government which has some sanction attached to it. So these are just, you can say, recommendations from government side.
Needless to say, the restaurant industry has a different view. The NRAI, in a statement yesterday, claimed there was no illegality in levying such a charge, and whether or not to levy a service charge is a matter of individual restaurant policy. It argued that once the customer, who is made aware of such a charge in advance, decides to place the order, it becomes an agreement between the parties and is not an unfair trade practice. GST is also paid on the service charge, the association added. Another industry body, the Federation of Hotel and Restaurant Associations of India, had in 2017 said that while the rights of the consumers are paramount, the rights of individual establishments should not be impinged upon. Are there merits to the industry's arguments?
There are merits to this argument. the agreement remains between the two parties. That is, one is who's providing the service and the other one who is availing the service. And ultimately, it boils down to the freedom to contract or do a private contract, and how much the government can interfere into such situations.
The Consumer Affairs Department had in April 27 said that paying service charge or the tip to staff should be left to the discretion of customers and it should not be binding. It is high time that the government sets the record straight on this issue, which has been dragging on for years. The meeting called by the government may be a step in the right direction.
यार
मत पूछ यार, फिर से स्टॉक्स में फंस गया।
तो स्टॉक्स के साथ बॉन्ड्स, इंश्योरेंस, गोल्ड में बैलेंस कर।
इसमें बहुत तामझाम है।
तुझे 5 पैसा नहीं पता?
अब तो सबको पता है। 5 पैसा है ऑल इन वन अकाउंट। डाउनलोड 5 पैसा नाउ।
अब तो सबको पता है। Investing made easy and rewarding with 5 paisa. Investments in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.
Let us now turn our focus to markets. Soaring inflation, global central bank policies, and the Russia-Ukraine war have dampened sentiment across global financial markets. So how does one navigate this uncertain phase? Will investors have to endure more pain ahead as the returns get pruned? What does S. Naren, Executive Director and Chief Investment Officer of ICICI Prudential AMC, think of these developments? Business Standard's Puneet Wadhwa caught up with him to understand his investment mantra.
Good morning and welcome to the show, Naren.
Hi.
So let me start by asking you, it seems that the markets have been shaken and stirred by the recent developments. Have they finally put the negative news behind, or there's more nervousness that could come into play?
From 2008 to 2021 November, the Fed and other central banks in the world had one objective, which was basically take care of the markets. And after November 2021, they have slowly moved to a different objective, slay inflation. So if your objective is going to be slay inflation and not take care of the markets, you're going to have volatile markets. So till the day the Fed changes its mind and say we are again going to take care of markets and growth and employment, we are going to have volatile markets. And volatile markets does not mean that markets have to go down one way. They can go up and they can go down, but you'll have volatile markets.
So how does one navigate this volatile phase?
The first and easy way is to do it through asset allocation. And I believe that we think that as long as you follow an asset allocation framework and look at categories like balanced advantage and all the hybrid kind of categories and an asset allocation framework and follow SIPs and STPs, you are actually through with this kind of framework, because this kind of a framework is well suited for the volatility phase which exists at this point of time. Another very key ingredient which actually was very irrelevant in 2021 was the role of debt mutual funds like the floating interest category in this kind of a phase. And we believe that that is something which also becomes core in this kind of a category. And so I think with this kind of a framework, I believe that you don't have to worry about what the Fed is doing or is going to do in the near term. But the long-term outlook remains good. And people will make money out of this kind of a strategy and benefiting out of volatility. So you can benefit out of volatility by and increasing interest rates by only through things, by following an asset allocation framework and by looking at product categories like floating interest.
To what extent are the markets and investors discounting the possibility of the Reserve Bank of India being very aggressive with the rate hikes in the next 3 to 6 months?
At ICICI Prudential, we are much more comfortable with the idea that Reserve Bank also will have to increase rates significantly. The latest MPC minutes also signify that. And with that viewpoint, we have been believers in the floating interest category. But whether the markets themselves believe in it or not is a bit more difficult to understand. So I would say that we have been very clearly not surprised by what happened a few weeks back in terms of a rate hike. And we would not be surprised by further rate hikes in both June and August meetings. We looked at the global developments, we looked at the India inflation numbers, we looked at the way India forex reserves were falling and came to this conclusion. And frankly, it was in tune with our frameworks that we have in our fixed income research process. And that's why I think we were not disturbed by the events. And I think it's interesting again there at this point of time.
So a lot of support has been lent to the markets by the domestic institutions and the retail investors at a time when the foreign investors have sold as if there was no tomorrow. When do you think that some sense of caution or some sense of fatigue will start to creep in as regards investing in equities from the mutual fund side as well as the retail side?
There's a worry I have that whether the retail investor will continue to show the same level of interest if markets continue to go down. And frankly, it's something which has been a very interesting development over the last 6 months. And I hope they continue to show the same enthusiasm if markets continue to fall. Because if they were bullish at 17,000 and 18,000, they should continue to remain bullish as markets fall. And that is what we are hoping for. And does it make logical sense that as markets fall, that they should continue to remain invested or invest more? The answer is yes. And we are hoping that they will do it. But that is one of the most interesting things again, which we're going to see, because no one would have believed that foreign investors will sell $20 to $30 billion of foreign equity and that money will get completely absorbed by local investors without a big fall. Having said that, we are big believers that large cap has more margin of safety compared to mid and small caps, because bulk of the selling by the foreign institutional investors has happened in large caps. And consequently, we are big believers that there is a bigger scope for investment at this point of time.
Given the way markets have actually done over the past few weeks and months, do you think that the structural bull run in Indian equities and global equities also for that matter have been broken, and or do you think that this is just a mild flash correction phase like we saw in 2020, and the recovery was equally swift and fast?
See, the 2020 was a very, very fast V-shaped rally, but nothing changes the structural long-term positive outlook on India. Having said that, you're not going to see the kind of rally that we saw in 2020 in the near term, because that was driven by huge Reserve Bank support from every Reserve Bank in the world. So if today the US Fed were to again come and say, I'm going to do quantitative easing on a large scale, then yes, you're going to see that rally. But I doubt whether they will do it at this point of time. So we are not going to see big, large rallies in the near term. But having said that, I think India is one of the most structural long-term stories for global investors, and that too with the way what has happened in some of the other key emerging markets. India has become more attractive for the long term than some of the other emerging markets.
Thank you, Naren, for your time today. We hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
तुम इतना डर गए? अब क्या किया?
शेयर्स में ट्रेडिंग।
तुम्हें 5 पैसा नहीं पता?
ओए, अब तो सबको पता है। 5 पैसा पर मिलते हैं रिसर्च टूल्स, पोर्टफोलियो एनालिटिक्स और इन्वेस्टमेंट आइडियाज भी। डाउनलोड 5 पैसा नाउ।
अब तो सबको पता है. Investing made easy and reporting with 5 paisa. Investments in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.
The pandemic and the war in Ukraine have wreaked havoc on markets with no relief in sight. Meanwhile, the threat of another virus is looming large over Europe. Over 170 cases of monkeypox have been reported in Europe and in 4 countries outside of the Union. India too is on guard. Here's more on this virus.
According to the World Health Organization, the name monkeypox originated from the initial discovery of the virus in monkeys in a Danish laboratory in 1958. Human monkeypox was first discovered in 1970 in a 9-year-old boy in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where smallpox was eliminated in 1968. Since 1970, human cases of monkeypox have been reported in 11 African countries. In 2003, the first monkeypox outbreak outside of Africa was in the United States and was linked to contact with infected pet prairie dogs. These pets had been housed with Gambian pouched rats and dormice that had been imported into the country from Ghana. This outbreak led to over 70 cases of monkeypox in the US. WHO says that monkeypox is a viral zoonosis, a virus that is transmitted to humans from animals, with symptoms very similar to those seen in the past in smallpox patients, although it is clinically less severe. Evidence of monkeypox virus infection has been found in animals including squirrels, Gambian pouched rats, dormice, different species of monkeys and others. Now fresh cases of monkeypox have been found in Europe and other parts of the world. 16 countries, mostly in Europe, along with the US, Canada and Australia and Israel, have reported outbreaks of the viral disease, with more than 170 confirmed infections. This is the worst outbreak of the virus outside of Africa, where it is endemic. Britain has reported the most cases at 56 so far, followed by 41 in Spain and 37 in Portugal. Only 10 cases have been detected outside of Europe. So far, reported cases have no established travel links to endemic areas. Based on the available information, cases have mainly, but not exclusively, been found among men who have had sex with men, the World Health Organization has said. Monkeypox is usually a self-limited disease, with symptoms lasting from 2 to 4 weeks. Severe cases occur more commonly among children and are related to the extent of the virus exposure, patient health status, and nature of complications. The case fatality ratio of monkeypox has historically ranged from 0 to 11% in the general population and has been higher among young children. In recent times, the case fatality ratio has been around 3 to 6%. Animal to human transmission can occur from direct contact with the blood, bodily fluids, or cutaneous or mucosal lesions of infected animals. Human to human transmission can result from close contact with respiratory secretions, skin lesions of an infected person, or recently contaminated objects. Transmission via droplet respiratory particles usually requires prolonged face-to-face contact, which puts health workers, household members, and other close contacts of active cases at greater risk. The illness begins with fever, headache, muscle aches, backache, swollen lymph nodes, chills, and exhaustion. Within 1 to 3 days after the appearance of fever, the patient develops a rash, often beginning on the face, then spreading to other parts of the body. The rash tends to be more concentrated on the face and extremities. Monkeypox symptoms often subside on their own without the need for treatment. It is important to take care of the rash by letting it dry if possible, or covering it with a moist dressing to protect the area if needed. Smallpox vaccine and vaccinia immunoglobulin, or VIG, can be used to control a monkeypox outbreak. An antiviral that was developed to treat smallpox was also approved for the treatment of monkeypox in January 2022.
I'm backed by the nation's trusted bank, SBI, the banker to every Indian.
The World Health Organization has meanwhile said that there is no evidence to suggest that the virus is mutating. That's all for today. For more news and analysis, please log into our website www.business-standard.com, and we'll also be back tomorrow morning with more. Stay tuned and thank you for watching.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.